The vast chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with anxious chatter. Hundreds of delegates from across known space filled the tiered seating, their varied anatomies, from crystalline structures to vapor clouds contained in special suits, creating a living mosaic of galactic diversity. Holographic displays floated above the central dais, showing real-time updates of a spreading catastrophe. Council Elder Trell, a tall, slender being with iridescent skin, raised all four of his arms to call for order. The chamber gradually fell silent. The reports from the Nexus sector continue to worsen, Trell announced, his voice translated into the standard galactic language. 17 worlds now report outbreaks of the pathogen. Death tolls on Mariva III have reached 1 million in just 14 solar cycles. Projections appeared in the air, charts with sharply climbing lines, images of overcrowded medical facilities, and scenes of mass graves being prepared on multiple worlds. Our best medical minds have failed to develop a cure or even slow the disease's progress, Trell continued. It attacks neural pathways in most known species. Those infected suffer progressive loss of motor function, followed by organ failure and death within days. A small, avian-like delegate from the Rim territories spoke up. What about quarantine measures? Have we contained the spread? Quarantine protocols are in effect, Trell replied, but the infection period appears to precede symptoms by several cycles. Many flood the initial outbreak zones before showing signs, unknowingly carrying the disease to new worlds. The chamber erupted in fearful discussions. A delegate with tentacles instead of arms waved frantically for attention. The pattern suggests design, not natural evolution, the delegate observed once recognized. This may be a bioweapon. This statement caused even more commotion. Security officials conferred in hushed tones at the chamber's edges. We have considered this possibility, Trell admitted, but the source matters less than finding a solution before the death toll reaches billions. From the back of the chamber, a voice called out. All heads turned to see Maury, a junior diplomat from a minor spacefaring species. Unlike most members of the council, Maury's people had joined galactic society relatively recently. There might be a solution, Maury suggested, voice barely audible over the chamber's acoustics, though it comes with considerable risk. Speak, Diplomat Maury, Trell urged. Any potential solution deserves consideration. Maury stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. My research team has been studying historical disease responses across different biospheres. There is one planetary system we've never approached due to its classification, but whose inhabitants might possess the biological resistance we need. A murmur rippled through the assembly as Maury activated a small device. The holographic display changed to show a blue-green planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Earth, Maury stated simply. The reaction was immediate. Many delegates physically recoiled. Others protested loudly. A death world. Those savages. They would bring more disease, not solutions. Trell raised his arms again for silence. Diplomat Maury, you suggest contacting humans. Their world has been classified as too hazardous for standard contact protocols. They evolved on a planet with extreme environmental pressures. Precisely. Maury nodded. Earth organisms develop robust immune responses because their world teems with pathogens. Humans live alongside thousands of diseases without succumbing to them. Their medical history shows they've overcome plagues similar to what we now face. Another delegate objected. But their aggressive tendencies, their primitive societies. They've advanced considerably in recent centuries, Maury countered. They've unified much of their world and expanded to their system's outer planets. More importantly, their historical records show a consistent pattern of medical aid missions to crisis zones. Trell considered this information silently while the chamber debated. Finally, he spoke again. The situation grows more desperate by the hour. We cannot afford to dismiss any possibility. He turned to the Council's communication specialists. Prepare a first contact package for Earth. Include all data on the pathogen. Request their assistance on humanitarian grounds. The specialists nodded gravely and hurried from the chamber. This is unprecedented, Trell acknowledged to the stunned assembly. But these are unprecedented times. May the wisdom of our ancestors guide us through what comes next. The bridge of the Earth vessel Resilience fell silent as the message finished playing. Captain James looked at his officers, their faces reflecting the same disbelief he felt. The holographic projection at the center of the command deck showed the alien transmission, a desperate plea from something calling itself the Galactic Council. "Run it again," James ordered, his voice steady despite the shock. Lieutenant Reed nodded and activated the playback. The strange, multi-limbed being appeared once more, speaking in perfectly translated English. It explained how a devastating plague was spreading across multiple worlds, killing millions. It described humans as Deathworlders, whose biology might hold the key to saving countless lives. The message ended with coordinates for a rendezvous point near Jupiter's orbit. Sensors confirmed the transmission originated beyond our solar system, Reed reported. The data package contains biological information about the pathogen and affected species. It's like nothing in our databases, sir. Dr. Keller, the ship's chief medical officer, was already reviewing the medical data on her tablet. This is remarkable. If this is genuine, we're looking at a highly adaptive neural pathogen. But there are similarities to certain terrestrial viruses humans developed immunity to centuries ago. James moved to the viewport, gazing out at the stars that suddenly seemed less empty, less familiar. Deathworlders, he repeated quietly. They consider Earth a death world, and us dangerous because of it. Makes sense when you think about it, commented Commander Patel, the first officer. Our gravity, atmospheric pressure, bacteria count, predator evolution, even our radiation levels. Earth would be lethal to species that evolved in more gentle environments. James turned back to face his crew. Send this up the chain immediately. I want verification protocols and a response team assembled within the hour. 3 days later, the Resilience approached the rendezvous coordinates, leading a small fleet of Earth's most advanced vessels. After intensive government deliberations, humanity had decided to answer the call. James stood on the bridge as the alien ship came into view. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of their vessel, with an organic, flowing design unlike anything humans had built. "They're hailing us," Reed announced. "On screen," James ordered. The alien from the message appeared, its iridescent skin catching the light strangely. "Captain James of Earth Vessel Resilience," it spoke. "I am Council Elder Trell. Your prompt response exceeds our hopes." "We came to help," James replied simply. "Though I must admit, this is not how we imagined first contact would happen." Trell's expression shifted in a way James couldn't interpret. "Circumstances are dire. We've prepared docking procedures for your vessels. Our medical teams await yours with great anticipation." As the communication ended, Dr. Keller joined James at the viewport. "The volunteer teams are ready, Captain. 20 doctors, 30 researchers, and 15 support personnel." "And the military contingent?" James asked. "Commander Patel has them prepared. Strictly defensive roles, as ordered." James nodded, watching as the massive alien ship extended docking arms toward them. "We're about to make history, Doctor. First humans to set foot on an alien vessel. First humans to potentially save an interstellar community," Keller corrected with a small smile. The docking procedure completed with surprising smoothness. James led the first contact team to the airlock, where they underwent final suit checks. The aliens had assured them their atmosphere was compatible, but protocols demanded caution. As the airlock cycled, James felt the weight of the moment. Whatever lay beyond that door would change humanity forever. The door slid open, revealing a delegation of varied alien forms. At their center stood a smaller, blue-skinned being. "I am Telex," it said, bowing slightly. "I will serve as your guide. On behalf of all affected worlds, I thank you for coming." James removed his helmet, taking his first breath of alien air. "We came because you needed help. That's what humans do." Telex's large eyes blinked rapidly. "The Council was right to contact you, despite fears. Follow me. There is much to explain, and time grows short for many worlds." The descent to Novaris was unlike anything the human team had experienced. Through the viewport of the shuttle, they watched as sprawling cities came into view, elegant spiraling structures that seemed to grow from the land rather than sit upon it. But even from orbit, they could see many of these cities were dark, abandoned. Novaris was the first world hit, Telex explained, gesturing toward the approaching surface. Once home to 12 million souls, now fewer than 4 million remain. Dr. Wells pressed her face closer to the glass, her scientific curiosity momentarily overwhelming the gravity of the situation. "The architecture is remarkable. Those buildings, they're partially organic, aren't they?" "Yes," Telex replied. "The Novarians shape living matter into dwellings. Or they did." A pause. "Most builders are among the dead." The shuttle banked sharply, avoiding a massive floating structure that had partially collapsed. The pilot, a six-limbed being named Krex, spoke rapidly in his native tongue. Telex translated. "We're approaching the central quarantine zone. It's the only area with functional infrastructure. Prepare for landing." When the doors opened, the humans were hit by the heavy, sweet smell of disinfectant. A group of Novarians waited at a distance, their slender bodies wrapped in protective coverings. One stepped forward cautiously. "Welcome to Novaris. I am Director Len of the Emergency Response Coalition." The translator rendered her musical language into flat English. "You must forgive our caution. We were told your species carries many pathogens without harm." Captain Drake nodded. "We've been thoroughly decontaminated, but your caution is understandable." As the team disembarked, they noticed how the Novarians kept their distance. Dr. Wells carried sampling equipment, while military personnel led by Lieutenant Marsh formed a protective perimeter around the scientists. Director Len guided them toward a massive dome structure. This was once our most prestigious research center. Now it serves as both hospital and laboratory. Inside, the humans were met with a scene of controlled chaos. Hundreds of patients lay in rows, attended by overworked medical staff. The infected showed similar symptoms across different species: tremors, neural degradation, systems failure. "Our medical personnel are dying faster than other groups," Len explained. "Prolonged exposure increases infection rates dramatically." Dr. Wells immediately began setting up equipment. "I need blood samples from patients at various stages, and from any naturally immune individuals you've identified." A Novarian scientist approached, then stopped several feet away, eyes wide with alarm. You're not wearing containment suits in the primary treatment area." "We're properly vaccinated against known pathogens," Dr. Wells explained, continuing her work without looking up. "But the air itself, the surfaces, everything here is contaminated." Captain Drake stepped forward. "Our biology is different. Early tests suggest this pathogen can't gain a foothold in human physiology. That's why we're here." The Novarian scientist looked at them with new understanding, perhaps even awe. "You truly are from a death world." Lieutenant Marsh had been scanning the facility. "Captain, security is minimal. If this disease is as valuable as biological warfare, this facility should be under heavy guard. The concept of stealing suffering is foreign to Novarians," Len explained, overhearing. "But you raise a valid concern we hadn't considered." As the day progressed, Dr. Wells worked frantically, analyzing samples and comparing them to Earth diseases. The other humans established a base of operations, setting up communications and security protocols. Late into the night cycle, Dr. Wells called the team together. Her eyes were bright with excitement. "The pathogen shares remarkable similarities with an Earth virus that caused neural degeneration in livestock centuries ago. Humans developed resistance after a mild outbreak. Our antibodies recognize similar protein structures." "You're saying we're naturally immune?" Captain Drake asked. Not just immune, Dr. Wells replied. Our blood contains the blueprint for a cure. We could synthesize a treatment using human antibodies as a template. Telix, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. If this is true, you haven't just answered our plea for help. You've brought salvation. Around them, the sounds of suffering continued. But for the first time since the outbreak began, there was hope on Novaris. The medical wing of the Novarian Research Facility buzzed with renewed energy. Human and alien scientists worked side by side, their previous caution replaced by urgent cooperation. Dr. Wells had barely slept in 3 days, her attention fixed on developing a treatment using human antibodies. Samples of blood from the human team were being carefully processed, their components separated and studied. The pathogen attacks neural pathways by mimicking normal cellular signals, Dr. Wells explained to the assembled team. But human antibodies recognize the deception and neutralize it before damage occurs. A holographic display showed the molecular structure of the virus alongside the human immune response. Novarian scientists watched with undisguised fascination. We can synthesize these antibodies, one of the aliens suggested, his long fingers manipulating the display. But production at scale will take time we don't have. Then we start with direct treatments for the most critical cases, Dr. Wells decided, while ramping up production for mass distribution. Across the facility in a secure communications room, Captain Drake was engaged in a very different conversation. His face was grim as he studied files Telix had helped him access from the Galactic Council's disease control archives. These spread patterns aren't natural, Drake muttered, tracing the progression of the disease across star systems. The infection appeared simultaneously in locations with no direct contact. Telix leaned closer, their blue skin reflecting the light of the displays. Such a conclusion would be politically sensitive. I don't care about politics, Drake replied sharply. This looks engineered and deliberately deployed. He pulled up shipping manifests and transport records, correlating them with outbreak locations. A pattern emerged. A pharmaceutical corporation called Purify Solutions had delivered medical supplies to each location shortly before outbreaks occurred. These shipments, Drake pointed, all from the same source, all immediately preceding outbreaks. Purify Solutions is a respected entity, Telix said carefully. They're owned by a consortium with representatives on the council itself. Drake's eyes narrowed. Then perhaps some on your council have blood on their hands. Lieutenant Marsh entered the room, interrupting their conversation. Captain, we've got movement outside the perimeter. Several unmarked vessels landed 3 kilometers out. Drake immediately switched to security feeds. Shadowy figures were approaching the facility through the abandoned city outskirts. How did they get past planetary security? Telix asked, alarmed. The same way they delivered a bioweapon to 17 worlds, Drake responded grimly. They have inside help. Back in the medical wing, Dr. Wells was preparing the first trial treatment. A young Novarian female in the late stages of the disease had volunteered. The treatment contains synthesized human antibodies, Dr. Wells explained to the patient's family. There are risks, but without intervention, she has hours at most. The family gave their consent. With careful precision, Dr. Wells administered the treatment directly into the patient's central nervous system. Now they would wait and hope. Drake called an emergency meeting with the human team, excluding Telix and other aliens. We have evidence this disease was artificially introduced, he told them quietly, and hostiles are approaching the facility. They may be coming to ensure their weapon finishes its work. Or to steal our cure, Dr. Wells added, which has just shown promising initial results. Our first test subject is already showing reduced neural inflammation. Drake nodded. We need to split our resources. Dr. Wells, continue the medical work with half the team. The rest will come with me to secure this facility and gather more evidence. Who do we trust? Marsh asked, checking her weapon. Drake looked through the glass walls to where Telix was speaking with Novarian officials. For now, just ourselves. Something called the Purifiers seems to be behind this. We need to know their endgame before we accuse anyone. As the humans prepared for both healing and potential conflict, the first patient receiving treatment opened her eyes, clear of the fog of disease for the first time in weeks. The cure was working, but those who had unleashed the plague were closing in. The medical bay erupted in cheers as the third patient responded to treatment. The young Novarian's vital signs stabilized, neural patterns returning to normal ranges. Dr. Wells allowed herself a brief smile before returning to her work. Around her, a team of human and alien scientists documented every detail of the recovery. 17 successful treatments, she announced, checking the latest results. No failures yet. The antibody synthesis is working precisely as theorized. The Novarian medical director bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect. In 3 days, you've accomplished what our best minds couldn't in months. The treatment works across all tested species. While the medical breakthrough progressed, Captain Drake and Lieutenant Marsh had converted a storage area into an impromptu command center. Security feeds showed the facility's perimeter, where several human soldiers maintained watch alongside Novarian guards. The approaching vessels changed course, Marsh reported. They're now docked at the secondary medical facility 10 kilometers east. Drake studied the tactical display. They're being cautious. They know we're here. A soft chime announced Telex's arrival. The blue-skinned alien entered with a data tablet. Captain, I've received clearance from the Council. Production facilities on 3 worlds are ready to manufacture the treatment once Dr. Wells finalizes the formula. Drake nodded but said nothing about his suspicions. Instead, he pointed to the display. We have visitors. Any idea who they might be? Telex studied the images. Likely a medical delegation. Many are coming to observe your miracle cure. Without announcing themselves, Marsh asked skeptically. Communications are still unreliable, Telex offered, but something in the alien's manner had changed. A slight tension in posture, a flicker in those large eyes. Drake shared a knowing glance with Marsh before turning back to Telex. We're preparing to transmit the final formula to the production facilities. Dr. Wells just needs to run one more verification sequence. Excellent news, Telex replied. I should inform the Council immediately. After Telex departed, Marsh whispered, You didn't tell me the formula was ready. It isn't, Drake said quietly, but now we know. In the lab's secure storage room, Dr. Wells carefully placed vials of the synthesized treatment into a specialized container. Each dose represented hope for thousands. As she sealed the container, she heard the door open behind her. Captain, the final test results confirm. She turned and stopped mid-sentence. Telex stood there, alone, holding what appeared to be a weapon. Your treatment cannot leave this facility, Telex stated flatly. Dr. Wells kept her voice steady. Millions will die without it. Billions will thrive because of those deaths. Telex moved closer. The Council doesn't know the truth. Only a select few understand what must be done. The Purifiers, Wells realized aloud. You're one of them. We purify the galaxy of weakness, Telex confirmed. For too long, inferior species have consumed resources while contributing nothing. This pathogen was designed to cull the unworthy. Wells positioned herself between Telex and the treatment container. And humans, where do we fit in your plan? You weren't supposed to exist, Telex hissed. Deathworlders with immunity to our perfect creation. An evolutionary accident. A crash from the corridor distracted Telex momentarily. Wells seized the opportunity, lunging for the alarm panel. Telex fired, missing Wells but hitting the treatment container. Precious files shattered, their contents spilling across the floor. The door burst open as Captain Drake and 2 soldiers rushed in. Telex fired again before being subdued. The treatment, Wells gasped, surveying the damage. Most of it is destroyed. Drake helped her up. Can you make more? The synthesizer was damaged in the attack. We have only a dozen complete doses left. She looked at the ruined lab. Without the equipment, we'll need to use direct transfusions from our blood to save the most critical cases. Direct transfusions. Is that safe? Drake asked. For the recipients, yes. For us, Wells hesitated. Repeated large-volume donations will weaken us significantly. We could be risking our own lives. Drake looked at the remaining treatment doses, then at the security feed showing hundreds of suffering patients. How many volunteers do you need? All of us, Wells replied simply. Every human on this mission. Outside, alarms began to sound as more purifier agents breached the facility's outer. The main treatment chamber had been converted into a transfusion center. 20 human volunteers lay on beds, needles in their arms drawing the precious blood that contained the antibodies needed to fight the plague. Dr. Wells moved between them, monitoring vital signs and ensuring safe extraction rates. Remember, no more than 2 units per person. She instructed the medical team. Even Deathworlders have limits. Captain Drake sat on one of the beds, watching his blood flow through a tube into a centrifugal separator that would isolate the crucial antibodies. Across from him, Lieutenant Marsh did the same, her face pale but determined. Any word from perimeter defense? Drake asked as a Novarian medic adjusted his transfusion rate. They're holding, Marsh replied. The purifiers didn't expect resistance. They thought Telex would have disabled our security by now. A commotion at the chamber entrance drew their attention. Director Len rushed in, her normally composed demeanor shattered. We've intercepted communications, she announced breathlessly. The purifiers have called for reinforcements. A destroyer-class vessel is entering orbit. Drake attempted to sit up, but was gently pushed back by the medic. How long until it arrives? Less than 2 hours, Len replied. But that's not all. They're targeting the distribution centers on other worlds as well. They mean to destroy all evidence of the cure. Dr. Wells joined them, her medical tablet showing the status of all donors. We've extracted enough for 60 treatments so far. The antibody replication process is working, but slowly without proper equipment. What about evacuation? Marsh suggested. Len shook her head. Most patients are too fragile to move, and the purifiers control most orbital traffic now. Drake made a decision. Lieutenant, gather all combat-capable personnel. We need to secure the facility's communication array. Sir, you shouldn't move yet, the medic protested. Drake removed the needle from his arm, pressing a gauze pad to the puncture site. There won't be a yet if we don't get word out. The communication center was located in the facility's highest tower. Drake led a team of 6 humans and 4 Novarian security officers through maintenance tunnels to avoid purifier patrols. Each human moved with practiced precision, despite their weakened state, weapons ready. Novarian security forces are engaging purifiers at the main entrance, reported one of the Novarian officers, listening to updates through his comm unit. But they're outgunned. Drake nodded grimly. We just need to hold out long enough to broadcast the treatment formula to every medical facility in range. They reached the communications center to find 2 purifier agents already there, attempting to disable the equipment. The ensuing firefight was brief but intense. When it ended, 1 human was injured, and the communication equipment had sustained damage. Can we still transmit? Drake asked, examining the smoking console. A human technician who had volunteered for the mission assessed the damage. Long range is down, but we can still broadcast to the planetary network. If we boost the signal. Do it, Drake ordered. While the technician worked, Drake received an update from Dr. Wells. The first transfusion treatments were showing remarkable results. Patients who had been hours from death were stabilizing. More humans had volunteered for additional blood draws despite the risks. Signal ready, the technician announced. But it's weak. We need to get higher. Drake looked up at the transmission array visible through a ceiling window. I'll go. Upload the treatment data to this. He handed over a small device from his pocket. Minutes later, Drake climbed the external maintenance ladder of the communications tower. His body felt heavy, weakened from blood loss and fighting. Below, the sounds of battle echoed as purifiers fought to enter the facility. At the top, wind whipping around him, Drake connected the device to the main array. Lights flickered as the treatment formula began broadcasting to every receiving station on the planet. From there, it would spread across the affected worlds. In the treatment center, Dr. Wells watched as more patients responded to the human blood transfusions. Her medical tablet chimed, showing an incoming data stream. The formula was being received by other medical centers. "It's working," she whispered, exhaustion and hope mingling in her voice. "They can make the cure now." 6 months after the first human blood transfusions on Noveris, the Great Hall of the Galactic Council stood transformed. Where once tiered seating had separated species by planetary origin, now the arrangement followed no discernible pattern, a physical manifestation of the new order emerging across known space. Captain Drake, now wearing the formal uniform of Earth's recently established Interstellar Command, stood beside Dr. Wells as they waited to address the assembly. Though their mission had ended months ago, their bodies still showed signs of strain from the repeated blood donations that had saved thousands in those critical days. The last outbreak zone was declared clear yesterday, Council Elder Trell announced to the gathered delegates. After claiming 11 million lives across 17 worlds, the Nexus Plague is officially eradicated. A moment of solemn silence filled the chamber, honoring the dead. Then, gradually, it gave way to something rarely heard in the formal council hall: applause. The sound varied across species, clicks, hums, vibrations, but the sentiment was universal. Trell gestured to the human delegation. "We gather today not only to mark the end of a tragedy, but to welcome new allies who turned the tide when all seemed lost." Drake stepped forward, still uncomfortable with the attention. "We did what anyone would do when hearing a cry for help. The credit belongs equally to those who worked alongside us, especially the Novarian scientists who helped adapt our antibodies into a universal treatment." But the assembly would not allow such deflection. A delegate rose, their crystalline form catching the light. "Before humans arrived, we had accepted doom. Your people not only brought a cure but showed us how the purifiers exploited our differences to advance their genocidal agenda." Another delegate joined in. "The purifiers preyed on fear of those different from ourselves. They believed only the strongest should survive. Humans proved that strength comes in many forms, including compassion." Dr. Wells took her turn at the speaking platform. "The investigation has confirmed that 17 members of the Council were secretly purifier agents, including some from the oldest and most respected worlds. They engineered the pathogen specifically to target certain neural patterns common in what they deemed lesser species. Images appeared showing the purifier network being dismantled across multiple star systems. Their leader, once a respected elder from an ancient civilization, now faced justice for crimes against sentient beings. The plague taught us something vital," Wells continued. "Biological diversity isn't a weakness, but our greatest strength. Human immunity existed precisely because Earth's harsh conditions forced our evolution along different paths." The council chamber's massive doors opened, admitting a procession of recovered patients from various worlds. Many walked with difficulty, still healing from their ordeal. At their head was the young Novarian female who had received the first successful treatment. She approached the human delegation and bowed deeply. "I speak for all survivors. We live because you freely gave your blood when machines failed. Now our different species are forever linked by something more powerful than technology: life itself." Trell moved to the center of the chamber where a covered object awaited. With a ceremonial gesture, he removed the covering to reveal a monument. Figures of various species standing together, supporting one another. "With this monument, we established the Resilience Protocol," Trell announced, naming it after the human vessel that had first responded. "Never again will we allow fear of differences to divide us. Never again will we classify worlds as lesser or greater based on their environmental conditions." Drake and Wells were presented with the Council's highest honor. As Drake accepted it, he looked out at the assembled delegates. Beings who had once feared humans as dangerous Deathworlders now looked to Earth as their most valued ally.